Hello from the My Wool Mitten podcast. My name is Carrie, and I'm coming to you from the middle of the Mitten, Michigan's Lower Peninsula. After a quick visit with the sheep, we're going to jump right into spinning for handmade socks and knitting from your handspun yarn. Welcome. Here's me and the sheep at the start of our snowstorm. Well, some of the sheep, some are inside. This little outlet out here is an old, we called it the cement pond. It was an old cement tank where we used to water the horses. The snow's coming down pretty good, but it's not very thick, so it's going to take a while to build up. The lamb here with no coat is one of the Finn and Corriedale crosses. Her and one of the Corriedale ewe lamb crosses, having a heck of a time keeping coats on those two. And of course lamb fleeces that I want to keep clean. So just another small job. And on Tuesday I showed my messy garden and you all thought it looked so nice. Well, it does sort of, but there's also other things that don't look so nice. And these piles here, and maybe I'll insert a picture, when I take down sunflowers, zinnias, some of those kinds of things, I leave them in the garden through the winter for reseeding. Now things like tomatoes and peppers and beans that might have disease, I do take out, but those kinds of flowering things especially, or things like the basil that's gone to seed, because it's amazing how much will come up next year if you're not tilling that ground. So that's what some of that is, right there. Can you see how pretty the snowfall is getting to be? I can't see what you're seeing, so hopefully I'm pointing in the right direction. And here again, now this is what I mean about the garden. This is the herb bed, and usually like some lettuces and spinach, and so I leave that for going to seed. And that's our woods back there. The one that you saw me walking on the last little vlog. Be a nice time to buzz over there and get a walk in before it gets too slippery. I might do that. We'll see. And now I have something to show you. And I hope you won't be mad at me, because I wanted to stay ahead of the game in knowing that what I was talking about was actually working with what I was planning to do. And I'm not sure how this is going to work. I'm going to start maybe at the bottom. So you know what this is? The toe of a sock. And you guys are going to think that this is absolutely huge. And it is pretty big. So here's the toe. My coffee cup patterns from my mittens. Going to continue up. And you'll notice that it's getting wider as it goes. We're still going. Excuse my hand in the way. And going. And going. Until finally we have the cuff of one sock. The other one is nearly complete. Maybe by Monday when I'm actually going to be putting this out, because the other one's just about a quarter of the way to go, because I was working them concurrently. But then I got excited as I got close to the top of this one, and I just wanted to get it finished. But I actually started these mid-month, I think, a week ago, something like that, because I wanted to be able to show you what I had done with my spinning of different yarns and different textures. And you know, I was just going to do a stripe. We talked about that. And then I thought, I don't want it to just look too commercial if I do that. So then I just started putting in patterns. And it, honestly, I'm going to hold it up again, maybe even in front of my face. And I'll take some pictures to show. It honestly looks like a Christmas stocking at this point. But I did them toe up, and so I could try it on as I went. And I made this a custom fit sock. And some of my yarns were a little bit thinner than others, and so there are some places I don't use sock blockers per se. I slid my mitten blockers into the foot of these, because here was where I had quite a bit of inconsistency. This was the green Coopworth that I have mentioned was fairly difficult to draft and get a good spin on. So that was a little lumpy bumpy. The Suffolk, the brown Cordell alpaca, and my bunny toes spun very well. The gray Shetland is very smooth, but it was thicker. This is the Navajo churro, some of what's in here. So I'll talk a little bit more about those. But so even though I did slide it on the mitten blockers for the foot part, like you can see, I think. Can you see? Like here that it bubbles out a little bit. And going around the corners with my color work is not that good. And maybe you guys can help me with that. Like, it doesn't bother me for this sock. It doesn't, it's not going to wear funny for me inside my foot. But it does, you know, it does look not maybe as nice. Maybe because it's been sitting flat. I imagine you guys can see there and through there. And you can feel it, but more from the outside than from the inside. There's another area. I'll try to hold that a little more steady. So what else about this sock? Well, I had mentioned to you that when I was first knitting homemade, hand-spun homemade socks, that was before Ravelry, and I didn't, you know, I eventually took a class. I had a friend help me with a pattern that she had written, and so it was kind of like having to think back to what I did. And I didn't have any examples of those very early socks, so I went back through some of my old books, some of my, like an old drawer where I had some notes, and kind of pieced together and stumbled upon by accident. The toe that I used to make is the spiral toe. And you can knit that, you know, top down or starting and going up. And my daughter and I were both like, yeah, that's how it was. I was trying to think, you know, was it starting out with like the row and then the circular, kind of circular spiraled increases? How was it? But it's kind of like the, you know, the pinhole cast on kind of, and then going around. And my goodness, that fits my foot so well. And so I'm so glad that I kind of rediscovered that. So that's what I did, spiral toe, starting at the toe and increasing out. And then for the heel, now this heel, let me hold it up. You know, they look so funny, don't they? There, that might show it about the best. The pattern that I learned from my friend who had written the toe-up sock pattern, I knew that it kind of looked like a short row, but I didn't remember that it had wraps and turns, because I don't remember that being when I first made wraps and turns. And so I came across another pattern or somebody else talking about it. So it's like a mock short row heel, or short row with a short row. Yeah, short row, I guess, without the wraps and turns. And it just comes out so nice. And I'll remember to put here and probably down below what I then kind of ended up following to do this. Now then the next thing, and again, I don't know, I'll try to do a picture. because I did do calf shaping. And I think it was Elizabeth Zimmerman who said, or maybe someone else, but I think Elizabeth Zimmerman who said, you know, that the thing about doing calf shaping is that the circumference of your leg at the top of your calf or just below your kneecap is a lot more than around your ankle for most people. For me, definitely. So you have to either decrease quite rapidly if you're going top down or increase quite rapidly if you're going up. And so I just took measurements around my ankle and then slid my flexible tape measure up my leg and found that how many inches, about every 2 inches of my leg, the circumference increased by 1 inch. And so that's what I did going up to the knee. And I just did it on plain rows because I was changing patterns each color section. I don't think you can tell. I'm going to hold this in front of my face. I won't speak while I'm holding it up there. So I don't think you can see in the stitch patterns where those increases were. And now this is a boot sock. This is a work sock. And I could not be more pleased. It stays up inside my boot. It stays on my foot without sliding around. A couple things I did with the pattern, the color work that I think helped that. And I want to talk a little bit more about the fiber. So I'm going to pause now and come back to you to talk about, and I'll show you the one that's still on the needles, and we'll talk about the fabric a little bit more. And so now that I've told you about my sock, that from my first spin of the year, and I've hung it back here, just so we can admire its beauty from a distance, I'd like to ask you about yours. Have you already made your sock? Have you already started it? Are you getting ready to start it? Or maybe you're getting ready to do a second one or a third. But tell us about your sock and tell us about what you've learned from spinning so far. I'm curious because I know that there are some of you that went rogue and totally ignored my advice to go with fibers that are of similar length. You may have blended short fibers and long fibers. Some of you spun a single of one fiber and a single of another fiber and plied them, and you're going to use them. And you know what? That is perfectly all right. And I'm proud of you for doing that. Because as I said, there are no rules and you spin what you want. And I only made suggestions of what I have found that worked and didn't work for me in the past. So if you did any of those things, I'm especially interested to hear how your yarn turned out, and as we go forward in the year, I'll be interested to hear how those socks wear, how they hold up, if we follow along with each other here, and I think we will. So I'm interested to hear about that. Also, do you have a plan already? Do you have a pattern that you're going to use? Are you thinking toe up? Are you thinking top down? Are you going to go basic? Are you going to go something fancy? I really wanted to go something very basic for my first knit, or getting back into sock knitting. But then, and this is not fancy, it's just changing colors. Otherwise, it's just the toe and stockinette and twisted rib at the top. So nothing fancy that way. But what are you thinking? And Fran of Woolen Hearted podcast mentioned a pattern that she uses a lot that's a very simple beginner pattern. And I didn't write it down. I'll probably put it up here and maybe down below. I want to say it was a pattern by Church Mouse Designs that she has used and finds works very well. Of course, we referenced the 2 hand-spun, hand-knit sock books back in earlier episodes. We mentioned the Ann Bud sock book that you can use any yarn to knit the pattern from. And what else? Oh, online. And if you're going to purchase a pattern, then I would highly recommend anything by Mars of Hey Brown Berry, especially she does toe up. Easy to follow patterns, a lot of good, not hand holding, but good hints and tips along the way. So Hey Brownberry for toe up socks, Denise of Earth Tones Girl for top down. And of course, she's famous for her No Fear heels. And I can't remember, No Fear short row heels. And she has tutorials and such online. Roxanne Richardson has a lot of good tutorials. Suzanne, there's a Suzanne that has some good tutorials. So I'll put their names here on the screen too, or down below. So those are some resources for you if you haven't already started on your sock. So the thing that I want to say about mine, I was just looking to see if there were any other patterns here I wanted to mention. These socks that I made, like I said, highly customizable because I made them to fit my foot as I went and to fit the yarn that I had at hand. And I suspect one of the reasons that my hand-spun, hand-knit socks have worked so well for me over the years is because that is what I do. I don't change the yarn and change the needles to fit the pattern. I change the pattern to fit the yarn that I have and the needles that I have. And I think that that's something very important for hand-spun socks, especially, or hand-spun yarn, any project. And if you're a newer knitter and you're afraid to try that or nervous about trying that, if you don't have an abundance of the yarns or the time or the patience to do that, that's okay. Don't worry about it. But if you do have enough yarn, if you do have the time, if you do have enough needles, even this, the heel, I knit it, tried it on. As far as executing the heel, it worked fine, but I didn't place it right. So I ripped it back and I did it again. At that point, I was only on 48 stitches, so no big deal. What else can I say about that going forward? I just want you guys to be fearless with your sock spinning and knitting. Don't get so hung up in the mechanics and the details that you don't enjoy the process. The yarns in this, as I mentioned, are everywhere from a heavy fingering to a hefty DK, I would imagine. I used the size US 4 needles and 5s. When I started out, I was using 5 needles. I had 3 size 4s and 1 size 5 to work on. By the time I got to the top, and I was doing the 2 circulars, I think I had a 4 and a 5, and then I did my ribbing in a 5. So, just use what you have, play around with it. And if you don't like it, just don't weave in your ends when you're done, and you can always take the yarn back and use it for something else or for a mitten. So that's my take on that. I'm saying all the time again. Just checking my notes to see if I forgot anything else. So going forward, if we want to continue doing this, I heard from a lot of you that you do want to keep going, and let's keep sharing tips. If you have found something in the spinning process, let's keep sharing that with each other. Now, like with me, like I mentioned to you, it had been a while since I spun. When I started up again, I was very inconsistent and very unhappy and uncomfortable with my yarn, but I just kept going. It smoothed out. And my thick and thin was not so much for my inconsistent spinning as it was for my fiber and what would draft well and what didn't. So there's that. I think what I'm going to do now is, it may even be another striped sock, but I'm going to try spinning for something a little bit thinner. Or since we are still having cold weather, yeah, maybe I'll hold off on that thinner spin because I won't need those for a while. I think I'll go to maybe a 2x1 or 2x2 rib. Again, a thick sock, and easy. I could just change colors in that if I wanted to. So now, what am I going to be spinning next? Well, I have some more of the Corridell and Alpaca, the brown, that I just want to keep spinning until that's all spun up. and then that'll be out of the stash, out of the fiber stash and into the yarn stash, and continue on with that. I can't remember if I said this or not, but I've realized that I really have almost no color in my spinning fibers. And what I do have color is not really sock yarn fibers. So once I get spun down a little bit, that's something maybe I should change. I do have some really pretty dyed. One is a Romney and one is a Border Leicester from Mitten State Sheep and Wool. That would be really pretty spun up and done for socks, so maybe I'll do that. But so I'm going to continue on with the brown, and then I'm going to hold this up for a minute in front of my face. So I have the brown, that's the Corriedale and Alpaca like I had been spinning, and then now this other one, and I didn't realize I still had some of this left. This is 100% Corriedale, but it's from two different sheep. And I had mentioned before that sometimes when that's being done, especially if it's like a two-way swirl or a three-way swirl, it doesn't draft as well, even if the fiber lengths were similar to begin with. I think it just in the way they're processed, it's processed really well, it isn't that. But it's kind of like the fibers lay together and they don't draft together. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but, and also there's no alpaca in this. So, but I know it was Francie and her son Castle, and I know that these were long stapled, and I may spin this in a 3-ply for the socks. And I've probably got 6 ounces of this, so plenty enough. So that's what I'm going to continue spinning. Do I want to try a different way of spinning? Do I want to try doing one of the different, over the fold or long draw or something else? I probably won't. This works for me, and so that's what I'm going to keep doing. I know, it's a rut, right? But I have over the years tried different things, and then I just kind of lost interest in the whole process. So now coming back to doing it in the way that's just comfortable and that I'm used to, at least for now, it has me enthused about spinning for socks, and I'm going to keep doing it. So anyway, that's what's next on the, well, the brown is on the spinning wheel, and that's what will probably be next. I may spin some of those little colorful things in between just to give myself a little break. But so that's what I have. Now, for those of you who are you going to finish socks before you start spinning for your next socks? Or are you going to do both? Are you going to have some socks on the needles and some fiber on the wheels? Hey, maybe that'll be the name of our next episode. Socks on the needle and fiber on the wheels. Hashtag. We hashtag everything, right? But that, yeah, I like that thought. I'm spinning today on my Louette S75 wheel, and I'm spinning the 100% Corriedale roving that I spoke to you about. This is the two-way swirl of Corriedale from my silver gray ewe Francie and her son Castle, who we used as a breeding ram for quite a few years. And she is definitely the silver, and he is more of a pewter gray, but it's funny to me, I find that ends up, it shows almost more of a brown. So I don't understand color genetics. Maybe there's a brown cast in there somewhere. But, and this is the roving that I spoke to you about that as a two-way swirl. And you can see I've pre-drafted this, but I'm having to kind of maintain a pretty close control over it because sometimes I think that the mill processes this, they process each separately and then run it side by side. And so it kind of layers it together. So almost think about like layers of a cake that sit together but are easily pulled apart. Does that make any sense? And I thought, so maybe if I showed you a few minutes of this, you'd get an idea of what I'm talking about. Now I've dropped down to the smallest whirl, the smallest ratio, so fastest speed on the wheel. I've slowed my feet down, and I've slowed my hand movements down, my drafting. My fiber triangle is maybe not as wide as it would be normally, but because I'm trying to keep these fibers kind of flowing in there together. I'm not gripping them, they're sliding through, but I am kind of smoothing them. I'll do this kind of exaggerated, so you see that I'm smoothing them as they go. And I have to watch it too, because it does kind of want to make a little twist or a kink in it into the fiber. So I'm spinning this quite a bit finer than I did my first spin for my first sock. That was several different fiber types, and I went for a good DK weight yarn, knowing that the different fiber types, I'd need to have that little bit of wiggle room in my knitting to make them come out fairly consistent. This I'm planning to do the whole sock with this fiber, so I'll spin more, I'll put more on the bobbin, probably do 1 ounce at a time and then ply it, where with the others I did 1/2 ounce at a time. Very simple to change out the bobbins and rethread on the Louette wheels. You'd pop the drive band back, you flip this little brake band off, they go in and out. You can see it's super easy to thread your fiber through the orifice hook here. You don't need a hook or a tool of any kind. So very simple to change. And then you can see how easy it is to start the wheel just with your feet. And that's something that I teach when I teach beginning spinning. I think it's really a good skill to have when you're spinning, to be able to stop and start your wheel with your feet only, not with your hands, not having to reach up and grab the wheel and then hurry back and grab your fiber. I just like to be able to stop and start the wheel. So I don't know if you can see it from here if I stop and show you. If not, I'll take a picture and show you of how much finer I'm trying to spin this. There's a little piece of chaff. But it's a delight to spin. I'm enjoying it very, very much. You kind of get into a rhythm, and I hate to stop. I hate to stop and start, because then I get all excited and I tend to treadle too fast when I start back up because I'm all excited. So I have to remind myself to just slow down. Sorry about the creaky chair. And 2 things, I didn't follow my own advice. I didn't soften up my hands before I started. They look awfully dry. And then I can see that my wheel might need a little tightening of some of the screws, because it's wobbling a little bit. So that's the start of my second spin of the year for my next pair of hand-spun hand knit socks. Yeah, very lightly, as you can see. This yarn, this fiber, when it's spun into the yarn, makes me think of, you know, the old sock monkey puppets? That were made out of socks that were kind of that marled look. Maybe I'll find some white and some red to do some contrast with on it. So, and then I have to manually move to the next hook. Oh, I should have showed you. See, I've spun it tight enough that it does want to go back on itself. So I'm quite happy with that. Come on, wheel. There we go. So there we go. Thank you for joining me for this few minutes of spinning. There's quite a good example of that light fiber wanting to, I didn't catch it up in here, So I'll need to do that. But where it wants to kind of separate out. So I'll need to grab that and kind of get it back into the fold there. And so, everyone, we've made it from January 7th to February 7th. Some of us have already finished our spin and have started our socks. Some of us are still spinning. Some of us are somewhere in between. But wherever you're at, I hope that you've been having fun, that you've been learning something, and that you're still coming at this with an open mind. And I especially hope that you'll continue on with us in this journey to hand-spun, hand-knit socks. So for our cast-on party, I just want to say I hope you have some good reference materials. I hope you have spun a sample. I hope that maybe you've knit a sample, and maybe your actual sock is your sample. And that's a great deal too. Have you been keeping records, recording it somewhere? Whether that's in a journal or on Ravelry, or with pictures on Instagram or on YouTube if you have a YouTube channel. But all of those things, we'll have at the ready to start tonight to cast on our sock. I did want to mention and do an update about the tip I gave about using a needle gauge to roughly find the idea of what needle you might need to use with your hand spun yarn by pushing it through the needle hole. And I heard from several people that you should double your yarn to push it through. So I'm not going to argue with that wisdom. If that's what you've learned or if that makes sense to you, then maybe I've been doing it wrong all these years. But that just goes back to the idea of making things work with what you have, I guess. But I do appreciate the tip that I heard from several of you that, yes, that you had always heard to use it double and to push that through the needle gauge to get your size. So I'm going to continue on with you, of course, and we'll check in with each other and see how often we want to do these updates going forward. Continue to use that hashtag #SocksSpinAlong. And tell me, what is your plan? Is it going to be a toe-up sock? A top-down sock? Is your yarn thicker than you thought or thinner than you thought? Are you going to have to add more plies? Just drop a comment down below and let us know how it's going for you, or on Instagram. Tag me at mywoolmitten or with the #SocksSpinAlong tag. We're all really interested to hear. There's really been some great tips and encouragement throughout this time together. So let's keep going on into 2022, forward into March, and see how that goes for us. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. I know it was in bits and pieces, but I had fun putting it together, and I really had fun showing you my sock. Now, I did not get that second sock finished. I've had to rework the cuff, and so maybe this is a good lesson, a couple of different times, because the last bit of yarn that I spun of the Corriedale and alpaca, I spun it a little finer than my earlier ones, and so I've had to change my stitch count in my needles a little bit. So I'm on the third time with that cuff, so hopefully I'll be finishing that up real soon, and then I can take a picture of me wearing them in my boots. Happy sock knitting, happy sock spinning.